Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Social Faction Forum. Bienvenue à tout le monde à cette réunion publique. We recognize that this event is being held on traditional indigenous land of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, at the Wendat and Haudenosaunee people here in Tacarento, and online across Turtle Island. Well, I'll introduce myself. My name is Barry Weisletter. I'm the Federal Secretary of Socialist Faction, Ligue pour l'Action Socialiste. And I'll be chairing, and we look forward to your participation in this event as we go from the speaker to exchange of questions and comments. On February the 20th, police in Montreal jailed the prominent Canadian journalist and activist Yves Engler. The reason? He criticized a pro-Israel commentator on X. Hate that name, X. Engler, who was released after spending 5 days behind bars, is a lifetime opponent of Israeli apartheid and supporter of Palestinian rights. As a student at Concordia University in 2002, he was suspended for his role in a protest against the visit by Benjamin Netanyahu, remember him, then a former Israeli prime minister, now a fugitive from international law. The protest resulted in confrontations with pro-Israel visitors and some property damage. Netanyahu responded by accusing Engler and his fellow students of supporting terrorism. Yves has personally confronted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly, and other government minister Pascal Saint-Onge, and Jeremy Levi, the anti-Palestinian mayor of a Montreal suburb. Engler has written 13 books, is it 13? Going on 14? On Canadian history and foreign policy, including Canada and Israel Building Apartheid, published in 2010, which is, thank goodness, available at the table there, and it can be your copy can be autographed. Engler was arrested by police for commenting on the propaganda of Dahlia Kurtz. Engler had criticized Kurtz's anti-Palestinian writings, including her calls to deport Palestine solidarity activists. He wrote on his website titled as follows: "I'm being charged for responding to anti-Palestinian hate on X." Kurtz openly calls for state violence against those challenging Canadian complicity in genocide. Montreal police accused Yves of harassing an anti-Palestinian media personality, but then they accused him of harassing the police for writing about the charges that were leveled against him. That's not very common for the police to charge you for harassing them, but this is what occurred on the occasion to which I referred. His arrest is indicative of a bigger picture, Canadian state's broader crackdown on Palestine solidarity, including student encampments at universities across the country, including militarized raids at the homes of solidarity activists, such as Charlotte Cates of the movement Samadoun, the Palestine Prisoner Rights Organization, and the Indigo 11. Since the beginning of Israel's genocide, the Canadian government's support for Israel has not wavered. And more, Toronto City Council is presently considering a bylaw to restrict protests in areas of the city. They're conducting, what do you call it? A poll. So that's what they're doing. They're conducting that, and I encourage people to tell them where they should get off. We're going to hear from Yves, and part of what he's going to talk about, probably not most of what he's going to talk about, is the legal case. So it gives me an opportunity to make an appeal that you're going to hear again later. The defense of freedom, the defense of democratic rights is an ongoing struggle that we are obliged to wage, and it doesn't come free. Lawyers cost money, and campaigns of legal defense entail resources. We have a container over there. If you haven't contributed, please consider doing so during the meeting or after the meeting, because this is a case that should be won, even though it's kind of far-fetched in nature against Yves, but nonetheless, it needs to be rebuked sharply and firmly, and your help will be instrumental. I'm now going to introduce him. Yves will speak about repression in Canada and genocide in Palestine, which unfortunately is escalating. He'll be speaking for about 40 minutes, right? And he'll be followed by questions and answers. And please give us a rousing, warm welcome for Yves Engler.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks everyone for coming out. I have to say, what brought me here to Toronto today is actually tomorrow's demo. And I think that this demo tomorrow is very important in the context, obviously, of the restarting of the horrors that we saw for 16 months. Over 200 children killed in the past 3 or 4 days in Gaza, multiple hundreds more innocent people killed, but also in the Canadian context, right, where we have this new prime minister and we have an election to show that we are, the demonstrations are strong, the mobilization is strong. I think it's particularly important in this context. We're seeing some indication that Liberal MPs are trying to speak out a bit more. We have Nate Erskine-Smith here, who's in the cabinet, at least still, who's posted not a good statement, but certainly better than we're seeing other cabinet ministers. And so we're seeing, and obviously like Alexandre Boris, NDP MP, showed up on Tuesday at the emergency rally at the consulate in the U.S. consulate in Montreal. So I think they understand that the media portrays things in one way that most people, oppose the people protesting the genocide, but in fact, most Canadians, of course, are either hostile to what Israel's doing or at minimum uncomfortable. And anyway, so I think it's really important for us to really get during this election period and specifically tomorrow to come out, everyone come out for the demonstration. So what I'm basically planning to talk about, I guess I'll start off a little bit with my personal experience. So about a month ago, I was called by a police investigator to tell me that they wanted me to come into the station the next day because I had, according to her, harassed Dalia Kurtz. Dalia Kurtz, people don't know, is this really aggressively anti-Palestinian social media influencer. She apparently she's had some corporate media background. I only became aware of her about a year ago on X. That's my only personal interaction with her is on X, and basically responding to her racism, her promotion of violence. She's off on the pretty extreme end of the Zionist world. For instance, 3 months ago, there was a rally. Some neo-Nazis in Hamilton had a rally with a mass deportations now, and Dalia Kurtz is posting in favor of this. So she's off on even within the Zionist movement, off into the kind of fringe, hardline kind of world. So I posted her. I've never messaged her. I've never talked to her. I've never seen her in person. I've never. I don't follow her on X even. It's just that it comes into my feed and I respond, right? And I respond snarkily. I respond hard hitting politically. No threats of any sort whatsoever. Basically, the police opened up the file in the summertime. So on July 5th, Dalia Kurtz quote tweets me from a few days before and does this thing about you are harassing me, stop harassing me. This is your last warning. She says this, which at this point, I think she's preparing the terrain for a legal battle. Okay. She doesn't block me on X. There's a simple function to just say, if you don't want me to respond to your statements on X, you can just block me. Simple as that. Okay. She chooses not to do that. So she's setting the train. Now the Montreal police open the file and then decide it doesn't warrant charges. Then they get in mid-December, the law firm of Neil Oberman, who's a conservative candidate in Montreal, going up against Anthony Housefather, painting Anthony Housefather as not sufficiently pro genocide. If anybody knows who Anthony Housefather is, they know that that's pretty extreme. And so Oberman gets involved, and then the police open the file back up, and then 2 months later decide to charge me. And now I of course start which was a mistake. I respond to the police officer by like you're joking here, right? Like I like argue like as if there's like a sort of moral thing. You shouldn't do that. That's a mistake. But anyways, that's a little aside. And then my lawyer calls the police officer, and they're trying to put in. They want conditions that say I can't mention Dali Kurtz. Okay, and basically, effectively, I can't mention the case. So they tell the lawyer that right away. So I write about this, publish it, and as Barry mentioned, I'm supposed to go show up the next morning to go be arrested, and she tells me at the time, it's only going to take 15 minutes. You'll just come in, I guess you get your prints taken, and then you're released. But she tells my lawyer that they're going to bring this condition, which I'm immediately, there's no way I'm going to sign this condition. And so then when I write about it and support this email campaign, which gets a couple thousand people by the next morning, have emailed the Montreal police saying, drop the charge, then the cops come in with they have 2 charges vis-a-vis Dali Kurtz, harassment and offensive communication or something like that. And then they bring in 4 charges, all related to harassing the police, because I wrote about the case and because they got thousands of emails saying this is absurd, and they're continuing with these conditions. So I have a 7-year-old at that point. My partner was out of the country. They wanted me to come in later that day, and I said to the police officer, "Well, I got a 7-year-old. I got to pick him up at 3:00." They said he pushes it. Okay, next morning, come in at 9:30 to be arrested at 9:30. But at this point, they're making it clear they're going all in with the condition too. They're not going to just, which they should have done. I show up. It's not like they caught me in the act of anything or whatever. They should just let you go. But they're we're holding you in for minimum 24 hours as part of a process of forcing the conditions that the Crown, not just the police, but actually get the Crown to the prosecution to bring in these conditions. And effectively what happened is I ended up spending 5 days in jail to push back against the condition. Nothing's actually happened with the charges, just to win. And we did win, and this was a small victory for freedom of expression and for Palestine campaigning. The fact that I can talk about Dali Kurtz, as I'm mentioning her name here. In other contexts, I wouldn't be able to mention her name in this right now. That's what they wanted to have, and it probably would have been imposed for 6 months, a year. And even if I win, even if they drop the charges, which they very well may do, you're still not able to talk about it, whatever. So we did get a small win. It's obviously ridiculous that you have to spend 5 days in jail to defeat this condition. I have to also say that the judge didn't even listen to the my lawyer's argument against the condition. As the Crown just made the case for the condition, it became totally crystal clear that this was an infringement on freedom of expression. And the fact that the room was full with people, and there's a spillover room, people that had keffiyehs on, and the judge kind of, understood that this was something bigger at play than just this, there's a harassment, we're going to bring in a condition so he doesn't keep harassing this person. That's how they try to frame it, right? So they dropped it. That was good. I have a condition, or I have multiple conditions, but the condition which I was willing to agree to right away, which is that I won't respond to her Dali Kurtz's racist post on X. So I had to immediately, I blocked Dali Kurtz myself. She should have blocked me a long time ago if she actually wanted to stop my ability to respond. So I can't mention her, and or I can't respond to her. But that was a condition that it's not particularly important. Now, so I think that this case, it brings up kind of two important elements in terms of the sort of repression side. There's a lawfare side, Zionist lawfare side of things, which is a significant thing. So Neil Oberman is the leading lawfare activist lawyer in Montreal. So he's brought in injunctions against threatening letters, injunctions against I don't know exactly how many, but just of cases I know of, it's at least like a dozen. So he's the lawyer who brought the injunction against the encampment at McGill University. In that case, it ended up being a big mess. because he went for this really broad injunction that would have basically banned demonstrations in most of downtown Montreal, not just on Palestine, near near about having 100 meters within any McGill building on demonstration of any sort, and McGill has buildings all across downtown Montreal. So he lost that. It ended up being a boon for the encampment. But he sued Concordia. He's gone after the mayor of Montreal. He's gone after the police chief of Montreal. He's gone after the McGill Students Union. Has 2 outstanding against the McGill Student Union. A number of them have been successful. He's gotten that the PYM, Montreal Palestine, Independent Jewish Voices can't have protests within 50 or 100 meters of like 20 different Jewish institutions, because there was a protest when the former IDF did an event, and then the real estate event. And so he's campaigning this lawfare, and now that's part of a much broader network. The Canadian Jewish News had a story about a week ago, and about this network of what the subheadline was: CJA's new legal task force is suing the federal government, universities, and school boards to, quote, make people behave. They say in this story, the title was more than 550 anti-Semitism cases, legal battles. So CJA is coordinating a whole bunch of lawyers. This is Toronto specific, that they mostly talked about the story. A whole bunch of lawyers who are working pro bono, but CJA's, I guess, coordinating the whole thing. And they've just had more than 550 legal cases. I don't know if Oberman's fit within that. I don't know if there's other groups. I actually think there's a chance they don't. Oberman kind of operates slightly differently. But there's this whole vast Zionist organizational lawfare going on. And we should point out that CJA and the federations are registered charity. Well, CJA's the advocacy agent of the federations, which are registered charities, right? So we would be subsidizing, all Canadians would be subsidizing this work to a certain extent. So it brings in that side of this sort of lawfare kind of campaign, and then of course the state side. So initially it's the Dahlia Kurtz, and then it's the Montreal Police responding by more charges. And that's the state, and a part of the point, of course, of the lawfare is to try, from the Zionist perspective, is to try to get the state to take up the charges, and then the burden of defense is on us, right? Is on the Palestine solidarity, on people who don't have much resources, and you're basically fighting the state, which has sort of almost limitless kind of resources. So that's part of what's going on, and it's I think it's more effective than we know. So for instance, this morning I see on X the story from this guy Davide in Montreal. I don't know if I know him personally. I don't know his actual last name. Just first one himself is Davide on his Substack on X, and he got charged in the summer, in May. He did a TikTok where he said it would also be great if you, I don't know, called. I guess he's speaking here on a TikTok. It would also be great if you, I don't know, call or email or fax or just blow up Mark Miller's office to make sure his workers, they can't get anything done. He got charged for threatening to or advocating to blow up. Okay, if you read the sentence, the blow up is in the sense of sending lots of emails and faxes and da. They pull out the blow up, and so he just had the charge dropped. The judge just said, "Come on," but for this whole period, he's had a condition. Well, the condition changed slightly, but the first 4 or 5 months, condition said he couldn't talk about any of this stuff. Okay, so he basically said he withdrew himself from social media because of fear of this. So all these examples of people who get conditions imposed on them for they can't talk about the case. So and this becomes just a sort of like the de facto thing of the Crown is to impose this type of condition. We've heard all these stories about conditions about in Ottawa, a bunch of people who the condition is they can't go to demonstrations. There was one here, someone involved in the Giller protest a year ago here. they got conditions put on them, and then the Crown dropped the charges, but they didn't tell them till months later, till after the 1 year, the next, this more recent Healer ceremony, presumably because they thought that if they still think they have the conditions hanging over their head, they would be less likely to protest at this thing. All of this, we should point out, none of this is, you're not found guilty in any of it, right? So this guy in Davide, he had his conditions restricting his ability, and then they just dropped the case. In my case, they may well just drop it. They might proceed with it. They might not even proceed with it. I don't know. But they, this is, no one's found guilty, and they're being restricted from political activity. We have here, obviously, people familiar with the hate crimes unit in Toronto that's been boosted significantly as a part of this crackdown, operates in conjunction with the Ontario Hate Crimes Working Group that is been targeting Palestine solidarity. It's kind of ironic that the whole Toronto Police and hate crimes, when you have the police chief of Toronto taking photos with these Zionist fascist street thug types like the Strom Krim and the Magen Haret Canada. He was photographed. He was taking photos of these people not long ago. He showed up at the Genocide convention there in Ottawa a few weeks ago. The head of the Toronto Police. And they've been setting up the demonization of tomorrow's demonstration. So the complicity of the policing apparatus, of the prosecution in all this targeting is pretty outrageous. And as Barry mentioned, Toronto, Vaughan, I believe, began with the bubble zone. Right, I think Vaughan was the first place to have the bubble zone restricting protests, and now Toronto is talking about it. And I've seen maps. I don't know where things are at with all this, but a map of Toronto and how much of the city would be off limits for protest if they actually move forward. And as people have pointed out, that protests aren't new to Toronto. Maybe there have been a significant number of protests on Palestine over the past 16, 17 months, but during I think it's 2009. The Tamil community had major demonstrations that were very disruptive. There was no bubble zone brought in. Other person I noticed talk about the Iranian community in more recent years has had lots of protests. There was no talk of bubble zone going on. So we're seeing an element of this sort of exception, Palestine exception that is being kind of pushed. We saw that, to speak about the police chief of Toronto, who, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Demkiw? Demkiw, okay. So he of course has the billionaire hotline where Reisman can get him on the phone to have him go and raid people's houses, which is obviously very outrageous. In terms of the repression of Palestine solidarity that we've seen, the most egregious thing is what's happened with Sammy, right? Obviously, Charlotte Cates personally has had her house raided, and she got taken off a bus, I believe, by the Vancouver police. And basically, Sammy Doon Palestinian Political Prisoners Network is a grassroots organization. Opposing, in solidarity with Palestinian political prisoners and opposing Canada's complicity in genocide. And Vancouver organization got listed as a terrorist group. No one claims they've been involved in any violence. There's not even the most extreme Zionists, as far as I know, have never said Sammy Doon was involved in any violence. All they're saying is that Sammy Doon supports and or is associated with the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, which is another organization that Canada put on the terrorist list. Mm-hmm. And this whole terrorist list question is a very important Canadian contribution to Palestinian dispossession, right? More than 10% of Canada's terrorism list is made up of organizations headquartered in a long occupied land representing 1/10 of 1% of the world's population. Okay, and that doesn't include Sami. And that doesn't include the IRFAN, right? The first ever Canadian-based organization put on the terrorist list in Canada was IRFAN. It's a Mississauga-based group that a Muslim charity that was put on the terrorist list because they sent a dialysis machine to a hospital in Gaza. The hospital was under the health ministry. The health ministry, since 2006, has been Hamas run. And they supported orphans in Gaza. And the money went through the post office. Post office acts as a banking in many places in the world. Post office acts as banking. It was under Hamas administration. So IRFAN was put on the terrorist list for this. And this was the first ever Canadian-based group to be put on the terrorist list. So this terrorist list is very important. Like, how any serious person would be like, okay, how could the IDF not be put on the terrorist list? I mean, let alone if you were going to get into, other Israeli organizations that could be put on a terrorist list. But so the terrorist list is a really important part of Canada's contribution to Palestinian dispossession, and it's being used in the current thing with Sami in this very repressive way. And I should say that this the Yale academic, maybe some people may have heard about her. I don't know the proper pronunciation. Elie Dutagi, she's been Yale fired her in this last couple of days here as part of the Trump sort of attacks, and McCarthy's kind of attacks on campuses. And so she's being targeted because they're saying that she supports Sami. So when Canada listed Sami in October, they brought the US along with it. What usually when Canada lists, it's the US that brings Canada along. In the case of Sami, it's the other way around. I can't prove that, but basically pretty sure about it. So the US listed Sami at that time. And so she's been fired by Yale, kind of purged by Yale on this grounds that she has an association with Sami. So we're seeing this the terrorist list being used in a very repressive way. And now, in terms of the repression, I think that I was trying to think about, if you look at the history of Canadian foreign policy, this is not actually that bad of repression, right? During World War I, Ginger Goodwin was killed. Anti-conscription people in Quebec City, was it 4 or 5 that were gunned down by security forces? Thousands and thousands of people were put in jail. Hundreds and hundreds of publications were banned. Post office, they went through everyone's mail, and all kinds. So there's a whole history, and World War II, even during the Korean War. If you look what happened to the Canadian Peace Congress during the Korean War in the early 1950s, they firebombed Endicott, the head of the Peace Congress's house, during a meeting. Right, he was, and External Minister Pearson was calling on people to sabotage the organization. So there's a history of repression. Now, what's I think a little bit different here is that Canada was at war during World War II, Korean War, right? In this case, Canada's not at war. So I was trying to think of like what the analogy is. Maybe the analogy is the Pro-Funct. I don't know if people are familiar with the Pro-Funct, the prominent functionaries of the Communist Party, which was a plan from the I think 50 to sometime in the 80s, where they had the lists of all thousands. I don't know, full Tommy Douglas ends up on the list and people like that. But it's mostly sort of left activists on a list that if there's a crisis, that RCMP would just round them all up and intern them, basically. And people were put, as the CBC reported on this is 12, 13 years ago, people were put on that list just for opposing nuclear weapons. Right? Canada never had nuclear weapons. So that would say the sort of type of an analogy historically, where because you're protesting nuclear weapons, which the U.S. is, you're essentially putting U.S. nuclear weapons, that there would be that level of repression. But I do think what we're seeing today on Palestine is quite peculiar in terms of the fact, again, Canada's not at war. This is about a foreign state. and the repression of that. Another side, I wrote about this after being released, and I should say one of the things in prison, I got very lucky because the first night I got to the jail cell, I found this little pencil on a table. And at that point, I didn't know that this, like I had a huge score, but I was like a really big score because it's not easy to get a pencil. So I had a pencil, I was able to write for most of the 4 days I was in the main jail.
You had paper?
And the paper was a really big issue they had give you a brown bag that for your stuff, your pants and whatever that the things that they took from you to put in. And I had to, big part of getting paper was I had to rip up my own brown paper bag to write on it. But the real issue was trying to, they of course wouldn't, they don't offer you a sharp. So the real issue was trying to figure that out myself and trying to, but yeah, anyway, so I wrote. So and one of the articles I wrote was about the history of the repression of Palestine solidarity as a contribution to Zionism, to supporting Israel. And so if you look at it, there's the history of this, right? You know, I talked about an example 10 years ago, where a friend of mine in Montreal, a couple of friends of mine in Montreal, targeted by CSIS. You go back into the 90s, Palestinian Canadians who opposed Oslo were being investigated, right? And there's this whole intelligence sharing relationship between Canadian intelligence agencies and Israeli intelligence agencies. Snowden reports on this a bit, but there's a number of books that talk about this historically. Canada spying the communication security establishment, you know, using very different type of technology than today. That Arafat's name was always on the list of people that they were you know, keeping tabs on to then pass the information on either to the NSA or off to the Israelis. So there's a long history. There's also this long history of Israel assassinating people using Canadian passports. And this is considered to have been basically the relationship between CSIS and Mossad playing out. And there's the infamous one in '73 in Oslo, where the Israelis mistaken, they just assassinate some Arab guy, thinking it was whoever they claim they you know, legitimate target. That didn't get much. That was on a Canadian passport. The example that got a lot of attention is in '97 in Jordan, where they poison Khalid Mashal of Hamas, and the Israeli agents get captured, and they're forced to provide an antidote to the poison, and this is all done on Canadian passports, and it becomes a bit of an issue. The Canadian government, once it becomes public, the Canadian government has to act like they you know, this is wrong, but they do everything they can to kind of keep the relationship going. So there's this long history of connections between intelligence sharing between Canadian and Israeli intelligence, and including this whole quiet, you give us information, we turn a blind eye to you using Canadian passports to assassinate people internationally. So that's one Canadian contribution to Zionism, but there's a lot of them, right? And Zionism in Canada doesn't begin as a Jewish movement; it begins as a Christian movement. So at the time of Confederation, the main Zionist is a man by the name of Henry Wentworth Monk, who calls for a dominion of Israel. Just like Canada at that point was a dominion of the British Empire, dominion. A Jewish homeland in the Middle East that's connecting to the British Empire, and he campaigns on this. He comes up with an idea of what effectively becomes the Jewish National Fund in later years, a fund that raises money internationally to colonize Palestine. There are Canadians who fight to conquer in 1917. So Charles McPherson Nobel, who is a Canadian general who takes control of German West Africa during World War I. He becomes the governor, essentially. He subsequently, in 1917, the start of 1917, he leads 2 campaigns to try to conquer Gaza. They're both unsuccessful. About 400 Canadians are part of Allenby's successful conquering later in 1917. So there's a Canada endorses the Balfour Declaration, both, materially in that sense, but also because officially Canadian foreign policy is British foreign policy. So there's books talking about Canada's endorsement of the Balfour Declaration. On just in parentheses, people saw this campaign about Balfour Beach in Georgina, which is about an hour north of here, to have this Balfour Beach renamed because of its, Balfour, of course, this imperialist that apparently the mayor is against it, this small little town. I don't know where that's going to go. Before the past 16 or 17 months, the most important Canadian contribution to Palestinian dispossession was the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine and the whole partition plan in 1947 at the UN. So the British put their mandate to the UN to come up with a solution to the what to do around Palestine. And Canada plays a really important role diplomatically in pushing the Zionist cause. Specifically Lester Pearson, who at that point, he's a top external affairs official, later, of course, becomes external minister and then prime minister. He pushes the Zionist cause at the first committee, the body that creates the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. And then a Canadian Supreme Court Justice, Ivan C. Rand, is considered to be the lead architect. They go, a whole body of international figures go to Palestine to come up with a solution. From a Palestinian perspective, this makes no sense. Why these people from Ottawa and Czech Republic or wherever are coming there to come up with a solution to, give us independence. And but he pushes this partition plan that gives the Zionist movement 55% historic Palestine, even though the Jewish community is less than a third, even though own less than 7% of land. And then Lester Pearson, when this partition plan is brought back to the UN, Lester Pearson plays a central role in getting the Americans and the Soviets behind this plan. It's like Pearson gets celebrated on the front page of the New York Times and stuff like that for his role diplomatically. So that's Canada's contribution, the long historical contribution to Zionism that Canada has. And I would say after the UK and the US, it varies at each different moment, but Canada's been central, probably the next major supporter of Zionism. Now, to bring it up to today, I'm of the opinion, I've endorsed the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, and I fully support the aims of a movement like that. But I'm of the opinion that something that was much more, much less, I don't know, we call it hard hitting or seemingly radical would be a major step forward. So if we just could force the Canadian government to uphold its own laws on this question, it would be a major step forward for Palestinian liberation. Or to frame it a slightly different way, if we treated Israel as we treat like a historic right-wing US ally in the region, like let's say a country like Colombia, maybe before last couple of years, if we treated Israel like that, that would be a huge step forward. Because the reality is there's just so many different ways in which Israel is given complete impunity to violate Canadian law. And it's a totally unique kind of relationship. So for instance, there's all these Canadians fighting in the Israeli military, right? Well, we have the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act. Never, total refusal to investigate any of these Canadians who've been fighting in Gaza recently. It's very hard to believe that you're fighting in Gaza and that you have not committed war crimes. That's very hard to believe. Also, we have the Foreign Enlistment Act, right? Which says it's illegal to induce Canadians to join another country's military or to support another country's military. There's an organization here, Sarel, about 150 volunteers. There was the most common ad when there was a physical paper of the Canadian Jewish News. The most common ad in the paper was for Sorel, and they bring about 150 Canadians every year to volunteer on Israeli military bases, and they do, according to the IDF, they do functions that would civilian functions that soldiers would do otherwise. They clean tanks, they do all kinds of stuff around the base. So there was a whole case brought forward against Sorel for violation of the Foreign Enlistment Act, and the police won't touch it. So there was a private prosecution brought forward. A justice of the peace here in Toronto accepted that there was enough evidence to move this case forward for violation of the Foreign Enlistment Act. The prosecution service took over the case, threw the case out, just dropped it. So they were forced by the justice of the peace for the process to move forward, and then just drew it aside. There's previous to that kind of flows out of this other case that go back in 2020, where we brought a whole bunch of evidence of groups inducing Canadians to join the Israeli military, to enlist in the Israeli military. And the Justice Minister Lametti at the time, this has nothing to do with me, it's a police matter. We bring the evidence to the police refuse to do anything on it, et cetera, et cetera. There's a school here in Toronto where, according to a parent, 25% of the class joins the Israeli military. 25% of the boys' stream joins the Israeli military. There's not a possibility that school is not engaged in inducing children, teenagers, to join the Israeli military. Of course they are. And they do it in all kinds of different ways. And this should all be in violation of Canada's Foreign Enlistment Act. But there's nothing. Total impunity. Total refusal to take that seriously. If you look at the arms trade, right? The fact that Canada's still selling weapons. Okay, companies are still selling weapons to Israel. Yeah, after the campaigning, there's a pause in new permits that Melanie Joly announced. We don't know for sure if that's even true, but let's presume what they're saying is true. All the bulk of the Canadian weapons that are through the defense production sharing arrangement selling through the US, it's not part of those permits, right? But according to Canada's law, you can't sell weapons to countries involved in significant human rights abuses. The idea that Israel's not involved in significant human rights abuses is beyond ridiculous. The question of the charities. This is a huge area. This is a huge area where you bring both of these questions of the unique treatment of Israel and Canadian law, or in this case, Canada Revenue Agency regulations. It's about $500 million every year that's raised by registered charities in this country for projects in Israel. Okay? It's a huge sum of money, right? The Canadian Jewish News had an advertisement a couple of days ago where it's a tax firm saying that they can get up to 90% of donations to charities. They can figure out tax schemes, specifically this flow-through share, which I don't understand. That's to do with Canadian mining sector. So if you have a very high income and you know how to play the game tax-wise, you can get up to 90% covered of your donations to charities. So that's in other words, okay, Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz have given about $200 million to the Hessig Foundation over the past 20 years. Okay? It's possible that that's the Hessig Foundation for lone soldiers, non-Israelis joining the Israeli military. Right? Kid in Toronto, kid in Paris, kid in wherever, join the Israeli military. They're going to have all their education paid for. They're going to have a whole bunch of bursaries and this and that. Okay? They give them $200 million, Reisman and Schwartz. It's possible that 90% of that is us covering that. Unbelievable. Totally unbelievable. right? But that whole sector of the registered charities and then Canada Revenue Agency rules are absolutely crystal clear. You can support the Canadian military. You can't support a foreign military. It has nothing to do with Israeli military killing people. Nothing to do with that. It's just a simple nationalistic Canadian state saying, well, the military is central to a state, and so we can subsidize our military, but we're not going to subsidize other countries' military. That's it. Nothing to do with moral question on killing Palestinian babies. Okay? How could you argue that the Hessig Foundation is not supporting another country's military? I mean, it's like former IDF people who are all aboard, and this. I mean, it's like obviously it's supporting another country's military. The CRA won't act. Racist organizations that supporting racist organizations violate CRA rules. Supporting municipalities, other countries' municipalities, other country government agencies violate CRA rules. There's a whole bunch of Canadian charities support Israeli municipalities, and then the West Bank, right? The supporting settlements contravene CRA rules. There's dozens of Canadian registered charities that are violating CRA rules in different ways vis-a-vis Israel. And the CRA, we had a big victory with the JNF, right? That was a big victory, and then 2 others. But there's a whole slew more, and the JNF victory took like literally decades, So that's another area where just upholding Canadian law is like a big step forward in terms of ending Canadian complicity in Palestinian dispossession. So, and just another thing, I probably should have mentioned this with regards the just in a sign of like the completely peculiar relationship to Israel that's just outside of bounds of any other Canadian foreign policy is the pizza party, right? The great pizza party that our ambassador held for Canadians fighting in the Israeli military. Imagine in January 2020, our ambassador held a pizza party for all the Canadians at the embassy, for all the Canadians fighting in the Israeli military. Like, leave aside the killing of Palestinians. Why would a Canadian ambassador hold a pizza party for Canadians fighting in any other country's military? Does the Canadian ambassador in Paris, we're like, what does that have to do with the Canadian ambassador? This is the stuff. This is that unique stuff. And now, what happens when your ambassador does that? Deborah Lyons. What does she become? She becomes the special envoy to promote Israel's Holocaust, or what they call the special envoy to combat anti-Semitism and Holocaust remembrance, right? In practice, of course, she's just a Canadian government paid activist in support of Israel's slaughter in Gaza. That's what she's been doing for the past 16 months. And one of them wasn't enough. One of these special people, so you're going to have to add Housefather. We need to give Housefather a second special envoy. You had to have another special envoy. I think it's Jewish community relations is what he gets, the term, right? All of these resources that are being put just as at the anti-Semitism conference, at the chief of police of Toronto was at, which is just basically how can we figure out ways of supporting killing more Palestinians, right? Whole bunch more money is put into groups like Hillel, right? Hillel like explicitly excludes Jewish students who don't support Israel like that. They're open about it, right? If you support BDS, you're not allowed to be part of Hillel. And our government is funding this organization as part of, allegedly combating anti-Semitism. But of course, it's about promoting genocide. It's about promoting apartheid. So this whole unique relationship that Canada has to Israel, it's like I said, if we treated Israel like we treat Colombia like a right-wing historic American ally in the hemisphere, that would be a big step forward in terms of lessening Canada's contribution to Palestinian dispossession. Now, on the McCarthyism, on the attacks, the new McCarthyism, as it's been called, attacks against Palestine solidarity we've seen. I think the obviously they need to be resisted. I think that not just resisted, they offer some opportunities to widen the tent. I don't know if people saw today Robin Urbach in the Globe and Mail. People, you've remember her, she's with the National Post, serious, pro-Israel supporter. She has a column about the Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil, saying that basically this is the actions of Trump are the actions of China or Iran or Russia. This is not right, and this is somebody who's a staunch Zionist. So even within pretty pro-Israel circles, there's a certain degree of discomfort with some of the authoritarian kind of actions, and we strategically need to tap into that in terms of broadening the tent in opposing. But I think that the other side to it that we need to sort of I guess take heart from is that it's a reaction. It's a reaction to the fact that there's in the history of Canadian foreign policy, there's no movement I'm familiar with as big or sustained in terms of opposing Canada's complicity in international crimes than what we've seen over the past 16 months.
Exactly.
Right? There is no other example of it. And we should take heart in that. The state, is responding to that, and different, Zionist forces are responding to that in their repressive ways. But the fact that it's been taking place. Now, what do we need to do to escalate things, to get some more significant victories? Like I said, there's this demonstration tomorrow. There's many more and more organizations campaigning on these issues. All that I do really believe that the Liberals understand and the NDP understands that what the media portrays is not where most people are at. Most people are very uncomfortable with what's going on. And the more they know about Canada's complicity in Israel's crimes, obviously the more they know about Israel's crimes, the more hostile and uncomfortable they are, but also Canada's complicity in that. And I think that we're going to see a situation during this election period where you have certainly NDP and more Liberal candidates trying to position themselves as on behalf of or against genocide or critical of Israel or whatever. And that's in part because of the activism and the work that's been doing. So we need to do more of it and keep campaigning. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Yves. We're going to entertain some questions and comments from the audience. We're ask you to make your remarks within or less than 3 minutes, but I'm going to make some announcements so you can formulate your questions, make your notes, and then I'll go to you in the order in which you're here. We'll try to have a gender balanced speakers list to the extent possible. Some announcements. Well, Yves has mentioned the demonstration that will take place tomorrow. And it's Al-Quds Day, that's Jerusalem Day for Palestinians, for the Arab and Muslim communities. And it will be marked with a rally that starts at 361 University Avenue at 3 o'clock. 361 University Avenue, that's across from the US Embassy, south of Dundas on University. We invite you to come early. Socialist Action will be there at 2 o'clock. With a display table and banners and stuff that you can support or just be there for the start of the event. I believe there will be a march after the rally, but I'm not sure exactly where it will go. A week later, approximately, is Palestine Land Day. This is a very important occasion on the Solidarity calendar. It will be marked at Yonge and Dundas on Saturday, March the 29th, starting at 2 o'clock. So Yonge and Dundas, 2 o'clock on Saturday, March 29th, Land Day. And of course, it coincides with the massive movement to stop the genocide, which continues to escalate, not only in Gaza, where it's most flagrant, but in the West Bank, where hundreds of Palestinians have been killed, their homes destroyed, displaced, just because they are there and have been there through their families for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
What time was that again?
2 p.m.
2 p.m. on Saturday, March 29th, 2 p.m. And Socialist Action will be there earlier. We invite you to come early and support efforts to disseminate literature and sell some of these great buttons that you see at the table. Also, I invite you to visit the table and buy lots of literature, particularly the books that Yves has brought from Montreal, and I think he'll graciously autograph the books, so kindly consider doing that. I made an appeal earlier, but there were not so many people in the room when I did. A legal defense campaign costs money. There is a bucket there to support Yves. We have to have the backs of our activists who are putting it all on the line and who are targets, not only of the Zionists, but of the Canadian state and the political establishment. So if you can make a contribution, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to mention just two other things. One is the Socialist Action magazine, Red Review. It's an 8-pager, but some articles are continued on our website. So pick up a copy. If you buy the latest edition, which is edition number 18, March 2025, you get the previous 2 editions for free. So special offer, take advantage of it. And if you would like to be part of an organization, a political party, a revolutionary working class organization, which fights year round, 365 days of the year, in all weather, for transformation of society, for an end to the governments that are complicit with the genocide against the Palestinian people, I invite you to join us. You can pick up an application form at the table where you signed in, and we would warmly welcome you to our party. Right, so now I'm going to invite you to put your hand up and ask a question if you like, and we'll go to the woman right there, and then the person next to her, and then those two after that. Please, go ahead.
Je suis aussi montréalaise. My question is,
Plus fort, s'il vous plaît.
my question is, do you not have grounds to countersue this person, Dahlia Kurtz?
Do you want to take a few questions? Sure, yeah. You need some paper?
Yeah.
Here.
In a paper bag.
Better than a brown paper bag.
Repeat the questions for people online.
Yes.
Can I have grounds to countersue?
So the question is about countersuing. Is that right? Okay. And the woman beside you?
Right.
You don't have a question? Okay. John?
Thanks, Yves. Great, as always. I'm wondering if you would, long history of passive, overt, or even open support for Israel. But your arrest and earlier this week, the report from the Citizen Lab about Israeli spyware being probably being used by the OPP. In your assessment, is there, as support for Israel in the public goes down, is it the case you think that there's a pivot toward more aggressive policies against activists in support of Palestine?
Let me just take one more, okay? Brother here, yes, please, loud.
Yeah, let him write down first. Let him write down first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you have given us a historical account of the Canadian pro-Zionist movement. I think maybe I'm wrong. It applies mostly to the Anglo-Canadians. What about the French Canadians, Quebecers? And related to that, was Pierre-Elliott Trudeau during his 2 times PM, was he pro-Zionist Israel as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is,
So in terms of the counter sue, I don't know. I brought that up about well, to go after the police and the judicial system for abuse of authority. But what I've kind of heard from that is that that's a really, really high bar to attain. I did see that just today, Dahlia Kurtz is being sued by the individual who was for the Canadian Human Rights Commission. What's his name? Oh yeah, yeah. So being sued for her defamation.
You're so
Talk more about
For you.
it.
Please follow up quickly. I don't know, I've been so going hard online. I'm surprised they haven't picked me up at my house. How come? I mean, I just don't understand. How come they came after you for one comment like that? Well, I'm sure you do lots of comments, but I wish I
13
understood
books.
better how it works. Maybe because I don't put my actual identity, you know, so it's easier to. So, I don't know, are they watching everything we do on Instagram?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
With a supercomputer, it's.
serious, yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, to me.
Be careful what you ask for. But we got your back too.
I honestly, just bring it on.
There's a
I'm
yeah,
ready.
there's a tension between denouncing the repression and then getting leading to an inactivity by paranoia or fear. And I think we have to be always really careful with playing that, because I think we still live in a mostly free society in that sense. That, you know, the way that our society is not free is through how the, you know, who controls the dominant media and what voices are excluded and stuff like that, more than our ability to speak our minds and fairly, you know, like we're allowed to have this meeting and fairly, right? So it's important to, yeah, to not
And I'm surprised they went after you because you're white like me, Quebecer. You know, they don't like it when we get active, when we get all riled up. You know, they'd rather go for a brown person. So I'm surprised that they went after you.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have my speculation on like what the trajectory. That Neil Oberman, the lawyer at the McGill, at the courthouse where he was getting the injunction for McGill encampment, I challenged him. And my presumption is that's part of what got me on his radar very personally. I think it's, I don't think that, for me personally, I don't think like what they care about would be like my writing and even necessarily that much of my like
Yeah,
it's the social media videos that I've done where I challenge different people, which some of them get, you know, they get into the millions and millions of people that watch. I think that's what that kind of that's the kind of, you
I
know,
saw you speak to Carolyn Mulrooney the other day.
yeah. So I think it's stuff like that. Yes, in the radar. Now, in terms of yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I agree with you. That makes sense that as you lose control of the narrative, as the public sentiment is, you know, against genocide, you try to figure out ways of repressing that through different repressive means. So yeah, I you know, I don't know that in the, like, if there's a 1-to-1 in terms of the OPP adopting the, you know, that like that process, but at a macro level, I think that it does make sense that you turn more in that direction as you know that you're not able to make the argument, that's for sure, right? And clearly, like, the pro-Israel groups have worked very hard in, you know, relationship building with the police and all this kind of stuff of, you know, with different elements of the state for repression. I mean, they don't even really hide it anymore, right? Yeah.
I would just say Citizen Lab does work with activists all over the place to make sure their phones haven't been something you could avail yourself of.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very, you know, I sometimes talk to people about, you know, actions on my phone about, you know, disrupting whatever. I don't I've never felt any sense of that they're actually, kind of monitoring my phone or they're, tipped off and any of that stuff. So I don't know, but I kind of feel like, obviously it's good to be, cautious about, that stuff, but I kind of the, just make everything public. Let's just have it all out there in the public domain and kind of, I figure that sometimes people get, I've seen lots of like actions and I get it. There's certain actions that you gotta be quiet about and you have to be secretive about. But then that quietness and secretiveness means that the action, like no one can show up because we have to keep it all, people are over cautious in terms of some of that stuff. And there's tensions there that I think we need to have to have a proper open discussion about. Because, when they, like we're pretty clear, if they really want to know what's on your phone, they can know what's on your phone, right? So, yeah.
Has the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which you co-founded, been targeted?
No, not in any, lots of, attacks in different corporate media, different moments and different things, but
Okay.
nothing formal. And then in terms of, French Zionism, yes, I agree with you. It's Protestant. Like, I think it's a mistake to call it Christian Zionism. It's actually not. It's Protestant Zionism, right? And that historically, I think there is Catholic Zionism, but the Protestant Zionism flows out of the Protestant Reformation and more literal readings of the Bible, right? That's Zionism exists for a couple hundred years before there's a Jewish Zionist movement, and it comes out of more literal readings of the Bible, and so yeah, there's a different dynamic in Quebec now. I would say that in Quebec, polling does still show that Quebecers are more sympathetic to Palestinians than people elsewhere in the country.
You're Catholic, yeah.
But there's the anti-Muslim stuff that's gone on in the past couple of decades in Quebec. It's a very fascinating kind of dynamic going on there. So if you look at like a Journal de Montréal, which I read daily, which is, in some sense the most widely circulated paper in Quebec, and in some sense would be, it's a tabloid, not a broadsheet. So in some sense it's similar to the Toronto Sun. Like it's nothing like the Toronto Sun in terms of its
Content.
content on pro-Israel craziness or whatever. But it's very anti-Muslim,
Really.
and the sort of that brings in a basically an anti-Palestinian kind of through that angle to a large extent. So Quebec, the historic sympathy of this sort of left nationalist Quebec, which there really was left nationalist Quebec sympathy for the Palestinian cause at a time when there was very little left Anglophone nationalist sympathy for the Palestinian cause. That has dissipated, I would say, quite a bit. Now, in terms of Pierre Trudeau's support for Israel, I would my assessment, and I did, have now gone deep into Pierre Trudeau's foreign policy in general or Palestine specifically. Unlike some other characters like Lester Pearson, where I have done extensive investigation of more recent figures, but he's the least anti-Palestinian. Pierre Trudeau is the least anti-Palestinian Canadian Prime Minister, maybe with Chrétien, but those are the two least anti-Palestinian Canadian Prime Ministers. But that's not saying that they were pro-Palestinian. They just they were less.
It's a low bar.
It's a low bar, yeah, exactly.
Chrétien's pretty pro-Israel.
Chrétien is pretty pro-Israel, but if you look at like the voting record at the UN, substantially better. I mean, he does sign the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, which is, if you look at even some stuff where, Chrétien met with Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, late 2001, maybe it was 2002 or something. So you look at some of, there's different dynamics than what we've seen really since Paul Martin really began the ball going pretty extreme, And then obviously Harper, and
What
then
is Harper?
Trudeau has continued that.
More questions? Do you have another one, or can I take some more questions? Okay, Julius, and then the woman there, and the other woman there, but
Okay,
front row.
so just a comment and question. So in several unions, particularly in English Canada, from what I'm aware, there's been movement. People have coalesced around a group called Labor for Palestine, which has played a role in trying to build labor Palestine human rights solidarity with varying degrees of success. This the building we're in right now, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union owns this building. And OPSU, thanks to many of the activists, recently adopted BDS as official policy of our union, which represents 180,000 workers in the province of Ontario. Activists have pushed for policy to be adopted in general to support Palestinian human rights, specifically as well as educational tools for our membership. And many of us supported an effort at the Ontario Federation of Labor also to really have affiliate support educationals and Palestinian human rights. But it's it's a push and pull. I think in the not too distant past, has been a lot of Zionist pressure, which has held sway in much of the leadership, although BDS has been adopted by multiple large unions, CUPE Ontario, Unifor, as being two big ones in English Canada. And I'm just wondering what you think, if you've seen any perceived change across the country in terms of this type of thing, or in French Canada in particular. The French Canada, workers in French Canada are somewhat isolated from English Canada. And I just want to know if you have any comments about these developments.
Okay, take a couple more. Yes, behind the pillar. Big
Uh,
voice.
Thanks for your speech. You mentioned that a more effective and radical approach than just the BDS would be actually getting the Canadian government, enforce the laws that we actually have. Considering our government's history, basically giving Israel a carte blanche when it comes to the law, like what would be the strategy in trying to change that?
Okay, and the young woman next to you, yes?
In terms of getting your message out there about your situation, would you be interested in speaking to more people, especially younger individuals, about what you're going through, especially through the courts and such?
You know the answer to that question, but Yves will answer, will elaborate. Okay, you want to we'll take one more and then hear from Yves. James?
Okay, thanks very much for your talk. Quick question. Who do you see as your peers in Canada, the US, and across the West? Who is doing similar work to you that you are following closely and with interest?
Thank you.
Well, the first answer, obviously, yes, I'm happy to speak about my case and obviously Canada's support for dispossessing Palestinians to more people, and that's something I'm always open to doing. So if you have any ideas or stuff like that, then I'm happy to do that. In terms of the BDS or the laws, my point is not to say, I think that there's a marketing strategy, let's call it that, where it can be useful not to come across as I don't know, extreme or radical or whatever. It's just like if the Palestine movement's demand is just uphold Canadian law, that's a very difficult thing to deal with in kind of mainstream corporate kind of media, right? That well, obviously everyone agrees we're supposed to uphold Canadian law, right? So I think that there, and I endorsed the BDS, I don't know how many years ago when first asked by 15 years ago or whatever, right? I completely support the underlying idea of there needs to be sanction, boycott, I mean, it's totally, I mean, Canada has sanctioned, it's like 15, 20 different countries. Right?
Mhm.
So it's no, this is nothing, there's nothing radical in the sense of bringing sanction. There's something radical in the sense of where we are. Like we're at a situation, we have Canadian ambassador having pizza party where Canadians fighting the Israeli military. That's pretty far from there to sanction, right? Like it's so we I think it's important for us to ground our demands in our political culture and our political reality. And I would say that like so if you're in Ireland and you're calling for and you're campaigning around like not having Israeli oranges in the store, that I think has much more coherence than making that demand here, right? It's not that I'm like you know I'm supportive of it, but you got to bring it to the reality of your political context, and I think that some of the BDS kind of thinking is not actually rooted in where people are making these demands. In this case of Canada, right? So like what the campaigning should be is not the same in South Africa or in Ireland or Canada or the US, right? Like, you know, the US is one step further than Canada where they're just literally just shipping $20 billion in weapons. So BDS, like what does BDS have to do with that political reality? It's like literally there's nothing to do. It's just like, we're just like, hey, can we just give you more of these 2,000-pound bombs, right? Like, so that's it's not to say that the principle of sanction and punishment and boycott, but like in our case, the punishment of Israel would just be that we just treat it like a right-wing ally like Colombia, right? That would be punishment from here, you know? So yeah, so I think there's some of that stuff. And I think that there's some of the stuff, and you see it part of how they react, how the Zionist movement reacts to some of the campaigning around foreign enlistment and charity rules. They don't really want to get into that fight, right? Like foreign enlistment, particularly, they really avoided that when we got a front page of the Le Devoir, we got a certain amount. They just didn't want to engage with it at all because you have like right-wing Canadian militarists, like Jack Granatstein. Okay, he's just, you know, one of the most well-known, not very active anymore. I think maybe died recently, but for the last 40 years, the kind of preeminent right-wing Canadian military historian. He's of the opinion that if you join another country's military, you should lose your citizenship. So from very, very nationalistic, militaristic angle, the notion of fighting for another country's military, no. So that's a problem for Zionists. That's who their allies are, right? People who that kind of, I don't, you know, if someone went to fight for the Haitian military against the invading Americans, I would, there'll be, thumbs up in my view, right? Like so, but from nationalist kind of ideology, that's so anyway, so some of that stuff, and same thing with the CRA stuff. They've been quite cautious in how they push back on some of the CRA kind of stuff. But so that's it. Now, with regards to the unions, I saw yesterday or 2 days ago on Twitter, Hassan Youssef, who was the former head of the CLC, who's now a senator. So I saw two things. One is there was 3 or 4 senators that put out a statement. People may have seen this. Senators criticizing Melanie Joly's statement, her 2-side statement 3 days ago about the ceasefire, whatever. And he wasn't one of the senators.
Wow.
So he's and I hadn't followed him that much on the Palestine stuff, but what I'm taking from this is he's avoiding. So he's getting involved in opposing the genocide. So you have like much people who were appointed from the Senate from a place ostensibly of much more the establishment taking better positions in Palestine than this former head of the CLC. But then I saw him. He gave the King's Coronation Award that was given out a bunch yesterday. He gave the King's Coronation Award to the Mancinelli, the Leona. for the new prime minister, right? For
Chief.
brown person. No, Launa.
Oh,
Okay, so you know the daughter.
Labor International.
Yeah, so the laborers, right? So in Hamilton.
Yeah.
I don't, people probably seen how crazy Zionist, Victoria Messinelli, is that her name? Messinelli? I'm sure some people in the room see that, no?
You're.
Sorry? So,
You're talking about.
yeah, so she's like,
North.
she did the JNF fundraiser. She was like one of the people at the JNF, after the JNF lost its charitable status. So like we're talking often to the extreme Zionist, but she's just totally, she sued someone in Hamilton for calling her a genocide supporter, a whole series of things. It's really extreme. Anyways, so Yusuf gave him, and he hasn't been as active, but that Leuna's been buying Israel bonds for at least 20 plus years. And, he's, and so anyways, Hassan Yusuf, I saw just yesterday, giving that award to him, so, and then simultaneously not signing the Senate letter, so yeah, it is, that's just a sign of union stuff. But that, that reflects, I mean, if you go back to the history of Canadian unions, they were totally pro-Zionist, right? The McDermott, he called himself a Catholic Zionist. He was the head of the CLC for a long time. So that's broken down. Now, officially unions, we talk about Unifor having the BDS thing. I don't think that means that much. I mean, I think it's good. But my impression is most of the unions, they've now passed BDS statements, but they don't actually put any resources into it. They don't. The thing there was I think a big step in that direction that was kind of unique was the encampment. It seems like here, like the head of the OFL going down to the student encampment at U of T.
Yeah.
That to me was like the most, that was real. They were talking about like the police got to come through us before you're gonna take out the encampment and stuff like that. There was a period of pretty impressive kind of solidarity. So I don't know much about the person who's the woman who's head of the OFL currently, who's right in the middle of that. But that's a pretty big step forward. But my impression is that I think that probably some of the stuff we hear about the unions with regards to apartheid in South Africa is a little bit exaggerated, but there actually was resources put into it. My impression is that there's like a donation given to $50,000 would be given to I don't know, UNRWA or something like that. But even that, like the Zionist groups come hard at it. And my impression is that when you guys start talking about any kind of level of resources in terms of actually supporting stuff, it's the union is still very cautious and unlike where part of South Africa, which I think they did actually devote some commitment. In terms of peers, I don't know exactly what you're getting at with the question, but I mean, things like Canadian Dimension, Canada Files, Spring, Rabble, Breach, media outlets, Maple, Maple's done very good. Maple's done the best stuff, I would say, on the past 16 months in terms of particularly in Palestine. Yeah.
So we'll take some more questions, and before I go to someone who's asked someone a question before, I'm gonna invite people who haven't asked one yet. So do we have any? Yes, there, and then we'll go to.
More of a statement than a question, I guess, but yeah, my name is Hassan with the Peace League and Partisan Defense Committee. So yeah, I mean, I was start by saying that an injury to one is an injury to all, and it's necessary for the whole legal movement and everybody who considers themselves a socialist, like the working class person, to Yves Engler, Semi-Coon, and other people that have been caught up in crosshairs, like and another person in Toronto, a QP member who's also facing charges, and I think has a trial in July, also for only made up charges of like intimidating, basically things that he was at a pro-Palestinian demo and is being framed up for like assault.
Talk louder, please.
Okay. So but at the same time, like all the main political parties in this country, the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the NDP are obviously supporting Israel 100%, right? And they're supporting this crackdown against pro-Palestinian activists. So what we think this does mobilize the whole labor movement of millions of workers in Canada in defense of the Palestinians, right? The workers in Canada have interest in the defense of the Palestinians and the struggle of workers for better conditions. And the defense of their unions, better housing and healthcare is directly tied to the Palestinian cause, because it's the same ruling class, the same imperialist rulers of Canada and the US that oppress the Palestinians are also responsible for burning down the conditions of the workers here. So what are the obstacles to doing that? Like, you think that there's a lot of workers that want to fight, but the problem is the trade union leadership in this country is overwhelmingly ties the labor movement to the ruling class, ties them to the liberals and the ADP, right? Most of the union leaders are either pro-liberal or pro-ADP, or even supported like Ralph Ford. And all this does is shackle the labor movement and the social power to the ruling class. So what's needed is a political fight against the union leadership, to replace the union leadership with the Marxist leadership that fights to mobilize the power of labor. We obviously support like any type of legal strategy for winning these fights and like using every legal avenue you have. But depending on the bosses, courts, and the cops or the state is obviously a dead end. Like the only thing that's going to win is mobilizing millions of workers in defense of Palestinians and in defense of the people that are caught in the crosshairs.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I said 3 minutes, kindly. Yes.
I guess, I kind of would like, I don't really understand what the motivation or the goal is. Like, why is it politicians in America and in Canada support Israel and give them so much aid and support and leeway that they don't give to any other country? What's like the motivation there?
Resources.
Yeah. I invite you and everyone to pick up a copy of this leaflet at the door, which basically answers that question. Israel has been the cat's paw of imperialism in the Middle East for, close to a century. And it has a lot to do with the enormous oil wealth in the region. Israel is a power that has shown a capacity to control, constrain, even to repress and confront other states in the region that even want some kind of loose autonomy in relation to the imperial powers for the use of their resources. So I'm sure Yves will answer more about that. I just want to add one more thing before I let him take up the questions that were asked. Marco Mendicino. He's the new chief of staff for Mark Carney. That tells you where this Liberal government is situated politically, economically, and environmentally, for that matter. Also, we condemn, as socialists, we condemn the policy and the practice of all of the major political parties, but we need to call particular attention and to confront the practice of the New Democratic Party because it is based on the labor movement. It is linked to the labor movement. It's a labor party unlike any other party on the mass scale in North America. And yet Jagmeet Singh famously said that a Palestinian, pro-Palestinian protester waving a flag, a Palestinian flag, in front of the Mount Sinai hospital was committing an act of anti-Semitism. That's the absurdity to which the Social Democrats, labor-based Social Democrats, bend over backwards to appease the Zionist state and its advocates around the world. And that's not to say anything about what happened to Sarah Jama, the MPP for Hamilton Center, who was expelled from the caucus because she called for disarmament or what do you call it, a ceasefire before the rest of the party. Well, since then, you know, Heather McPherson, Charlie Angus, Nikki Ashton, Leah Gazan, and some others have taken a better position, but very far from the position that's needed, and that is total solidarity with the Palestinian people from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. The right to resist. If you're occupied, it's right to resist and fight back. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, well, for the one thing to add my question, Also, I'm also wondering why they support Israel specifically and not other countries to that extent.
Because they created it.
Yeah, so I mean, well, first I just want to say something on NDP and Palestine. I think that we've seen that things have gotten substantially better from the NDP over the past 16 months, right? Like I do, you look at someone like Charlie Angus, who was actually pretty anti-Palestinian coming out over the past 16 months. Even if you look at Singh's statements, like he attacked Carney on the Mendocino appointments, and he, right away on the ceasefire and then Trump's Gaza plan. So like this is all, simultaneously, of course, Singh has done many things that are just totally appalling, like the Sinai thing was an appalling, but there's actually multiple other examples. And we're still like really far away from them questioning things like the terrorist list, right? That's like just way off of Nikki Ashton now fundraises. She's the revenue critic. She fundraises on the charity question. So she's been pushing the charity question, and her rhetoric is pretty good on the charity question over the past 4 or 5 months. And she's press conference and I don't know if you saw the whole thing where they went at Nikki Ashton for the scandal. Her scandal of her finances was like directly came out when she came out on the charity question. I don't know this, but I think there's a pretty good chance that B'nai B'rith or CIJA or whatever's who handed that her financial scandal thing in response to her stuff on that. Anyway, so she's been getting what I'm on her email list, and I've many emails in the past couple months on the charity question. So she's starting to pick that up. So there is some dynamic that's changing within the NDP. I would say quite seriously. Heather McPherson, who's like, the NDP bad on every other foreign policy issue, pretty much, right? Let's be from China to Ukraine to even like look at their position on like the Haiti and the core group, right? Like bad. There's stuff on the NDP just came out in favor of 2%. This is a scandal, and no one's talking about 2% military spending, GDP, right? The NATO target that the NDP just came out. Now they came out that in a statement that, as I wrote about, they this really embarrassingly slow criticism of the F-35.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting in and of itself. But so the NDP's foreign policy is bad, truthfully. Mostly they go along with the establishment, except when there's significant opposition. And on this issue, there's significant opposition, and they've been going. So now with regards to like the why question, is I would have, in my Canada-Israel book, I put the why question much more at the geopolitical level than the pro-Israel Jewish organizational lobbying. Okay, over the past 15 years, I've put more emphasis on the influence of pro-Israel Jewish organizational campaign in the question. No, there's no doubt in my mind that if the U.S. empire turned on Israel, CIJA's power will collapse. There's no doubt about that. Okay, so the what I put forward is they're pushing against an open door, right? That the CIJA and them are pushing against an open door, and if you look at Canadian foreign policy, the best argument against the explaining Israel through the lens of it's just that CIJA and other pro-Israel Jewish organizations is just look at Canadian foreign policy elsewhere, which is pro-imperialist everywhere in the world, right? Now, so then you get into this sort of some of the unique elements of this, and there's the anti-Semitism stick. That's powerful. The anti-Semitism stick is powerful, right? It is a way. It's a unique situation where you have the U.S. empire, you have a communal institutional structure that is unique, right? If you contrast the pro-Israel Jewish organizations to the Canadian Congress, okay, which is another ethnic lobby group that's presented as powerful in terms of foreign policy, like there's many more Ukrainian Canadians than there are Canadian Jews. And obviously, there's many Canadian Jews who don't support Israel, as are there many Ukrainians that have complicated views of what's going on in the Ukraine. But it just doesn't have the same level of financial and institutional resources, right? If you look at the federations, we're talking about billions of dollars of assets, the Jewish federations. CJ is the advocacy agent of the federations. If you look at the number of groups raising money for Israel, we're talking about 300 plus registered charities raising funds. Like anything you can imagine. The one I've joked about is the Israeli Guide Dog Society. So in Canada, there's a registered charity.
What?
It's a part of the Israeli Guide Dog Society. You can think of like every different Israeli university, like the museums, the symphony. There's a Canadian Friends of that's like subsidized by Canadian taxpayers, raising money for, and so there is a level. I was actually here in Toronto where I saw that level of commitment to Israel that stunned me in 2014, where like the JDL guys, like they busted my bike and stole my lock and like actually scared me, right? Like I was like they were like this pro-war campaigning. I'd never seen that in Canada. I saw in the States where I went to an Iraq war demo and it was like a pro-Iraq war counter demo. But like I'd never seen that in Montreal of like, there's like anti-war protest and then there's like a pro-war, like kill more, like on the other side. And that's like, and there's a level of commitment that like basically, I had this discussion with Rick Salutin 15 years ago where I was making the case for basically the sort of like geopolitical angle to understanding the why question. And Salutin, and I said something effective like, well, Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz, above all else, they're capitalists, and sort of Israel is secondary. And he was like, I wouldn't be totally certain of that. And that basically their level of like emotional and whatever commitment to Israel is, and I increasingly believe that as an angle, right? Like if you look at these kids who go to the daycare here at the JCC, okay, down by where
Spadina and Bloor.
Spadina and Bloor, probably like the most like the least Zionistic of the Jewish community centers in Montreal or in Toronto. Okay, so when there was that protest against Freeland's office, okay, so it was like Freeland's office was like I guess across the way, and then the protest spilled over, and then all the pro-Israel types, anti-Semitic, they're protesting the Jewish community center. Okay, so then I just looked at the Jewish community center. Do you know what their daycare advertises on their website? Their daycare is influenced by teachings from Israel. How would a daycare be like this is just this is how you have to position yourself. In reality, the daycare workers probably had nothing to do with Israel and don't think about Israel at all. But the community center, probably as part of getting funding from the Federation, has to act like their daycare is like a pro-Israel daycare. I mean, it's like a comedy, right? So yeah, you would have every right to protest that Jewish community center. As well, was the point I was making. Is that yeah, they weren't protesting it, but if they were, of course they had the right to do it. This is a calling for killing more Palestinian children, right? Like of course they have a right to protest it, but you're not even allowed to say that, right? Hey, here in Toronto, Tannenbaum Chat, okay, the biggest private school in the country, biggest private school. They have IDF days.
Oh,
they have IDF days. A couple months ago, they took kids. They took kids to Israel to barbecue on an Israeli military base for the soldiers. Okay? There's never been a demonstration at Tannenbaum Chat. How is that possible? Well, we all know why it's possible, because if you were to think about having a demonstration at Tannenbaum Chat, the yelling and screaming of anti-Semitism, we would have no end of like, this is how they have IDF days where they tell the kids to wear, you can see little photos online, IDF sweaters, bring money to raise money for the Israeli military. I mean, right? And so like this is, you know, again, it's the biggest private school, like 1,000 or 1,200 students. You know, things like the question of like who's the main fundraiser for Justin Trudeau?
Yeah.
Stephen Bronfman in 2013 in the Globe and Mail boasts that he took Trudeau to Israel. And that he fundraises for Trudeau because of Trudeau's pro-Israel position. He boasts that he's more pro-Israel. At that point, Harper hadn't been to Israel. And so he's like boasting about how like, well, Trudeau's been to Israel and this. So like things like that. And if you look at the financial and social status of Canadian Jewry, you find that Canadian Jewry is overrepresented in positions of power. That's a reality, right? And like that's not to go into the anti-Semitic trope of like, oh, Jews run the world, but it is the reality that the Canadian Jewish community is you know a very influential community with a uniquely well organized institutional apparatus, right? So that's important. That's important in understanding the pro-Israel. And then the stick, and then it's unique. Okay, we have the U.S. empire. We have a generally well-off community. We have a powerful institutional structure, and then we're the victim. And we have that stick of anti-Semitic stick that's wielded very aggressively against anyone who opposes Israel. So you bring that all together, then, and I think if you look at kind of the more macro of all some of this, there is this Christian Zionist tradition. It's less influential today, but Christian Zionism was actually quite important historically in Canada, right? In terms of if you look at, you know, like in the fundraising in the 1930s, the prime ministers that came out in support of Israel, that comes from a Christian Zionist. Now you have the Christian Zionist things more at a more marginalized end, like McVetti, but that then you got in things that it's just like there's an element of it that's anti-Muslim, right? There's just you know that they play off of it. Then you know obviously Israel is a very successful, high-tech military power. So you bring that all together. I quoted, if you look at it, Lester Pearson in 47 and 52, I quote that in the book. He's very clear about the geopolitical, seeing Israel as a Western outpost. That's always been part of the calculation. But I would say there's a broader series of factors that contribute to the why question in terms of support for Israel.
Okay, we'll take a last round of questions. So I think, John, you had your hand up. You still want to ask a question? I may come back to a second round person or one or two, but put your hand up now if you want to ask a question. Okay, I'll come to you. And and at the back, Stephen. Okay, so John.
Okay, this is slightly off topic, Yves, but it's something you would know about with your historical knowledge. And the question is not to whitewash the Israel genocide and overreaction, what they've done in Gaza, which is just a massacre. But I want you to talk about Hamas a bit. Hamas has been in power in the Gaza for 15, 20 years. They were elected once. There's been no election since. Whether or not they do good charity work and run the schools and the hospitals and this and that, but they do have a strong Islamic ideology behind them, right? That is there. What did they think they were going to accomplish on October 7th with this attack? Did they actually think they were going to break out and take over some Israeli outpost or something like that? They had to have known that that was not going to be successful. Were they not considering the retribution that Israel was going to take on them? And the retribution that they took was 10 times more than what I thought would happen at the time. It's been the more retribution than they've ever taken for any other attack. And my question is there any possibility that Hamas could be replaced by the population of Gaza? Because Israel's to blame for the destruction of Gaza. They're the ones who are bombing it, but bad foreign policy and bad moves, they could use better leadership in Gaza, I believe. So just comment on that.
Okay, there were a couple of first-time speakers before I go to, Stephen, yes?
I just want to thank you for wonderful presentation today. I should speak louder, right?
Yeah.
Okay, he mentioned all goods tomorrow. If you could, it'd be really great to see everybody out there at 3 o'clock. Well, earlier. But I mentioned it's good to show up early, so between 2 and 3 would be great. Been a lot of, it's a big hue and a cry about this Al-Quds Day and how horribly anti-Semitic it is and how it's a hate rally. And so they've been doing their best for years to try to ban the Al-Quds rally. So that's why, it's really important to show up tomorrow. Now, you mentioned also the bubble zone initiative at the city hall level that they're trying to get passed. There's a process of consultations that are taking place over between now and May the 1st. So one of the things you can do is you can be involved in telling City Hall that you're not interested in having them take away your charter rights. Online surveys? Okay, if it's online, I don't know if it's online and in person, but there are ways to get involved, right? The repression from the police, I think, is a reflection of the fatigue that we've seen in the movement, which is set in over a year and a half. We saw in the initial months, thousands upon thousands of people hitting the streets. And a year ago, Land Day in 2024, was a time when the demonstration was about 600 or 700 people. And the police took advantage at that time to attack us. They saw us that we were a small enough crowd that they were going to send a message to demonstrate. And they brought in the horses, they brought in the stormtroopers, and they brought in about 200 cops to deal with about 600 demonstrators. So the repression is real. A few days ago, they tossed a friend's house in Mississauga, and they terrorized his family, and they're threatening to charge him with hate speech and contributing to a terrorist organization. So this repression is ramping up. It's ramping up. So even though we've seen devastation over the last year and a half, we're going to have to double down over the next number of years because the repression is coming. Okay, the issue of our time is Palestine. Everything converges on the issue of Palestine. So I just wanted to talk about what the police are up to. MQ is a fairly scary and slippery term.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if everyone could come out, that would be great. We're involved in at the Legal Center for Palestine. We're involved in challenging the Samadun designation. So if you could support us in that regard, that would be great. The bottom line is they can come after Samadun, they can come after any of you. Okay? Any of you who support Palestinian liberation or Palestinian human rights, you're a potential target now. Okay? They come after Irfan for trumped up reasons. They're coming after Samadun. The liberals went ahead with it because it was politically expedient. So the coming days and months and years are going to be very, very difficult. So we're really going to have to double down and engage in this fight in as many ways as we can, in the streets, online surveys, wherever they're looking to take away our rights.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay. John, very briefly, because you spoke before.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna comment, a comment that we're all premature anti-Zionists. In the same way that the anti-fascists before World War II were shit on by the state because the state loved the fascists. I would ask you this, Yves, we're going, if the reports are correct, the writ's gonna drop tomorrow
Mhm.
and Canadians are gonna be asked to vote. There are no good choices at the federal level. There are less bad choices, as Barry articulated. What is your thinking on how to vote or not to vote in the federal election?
Okay, hold on a second. So that's the last and the final round of questions, unless you have a really brief one, and then that'll be it.
Your arrest, was there coverage in the Montreal press or the Montreal media, be it alternative, be it any kind of media? You know, how did the word get out besides through your own network here?
Okay, and I just want to reinforce the point that Stephen and others made about coming to the demonstration tomorrow. Very important to show solidarity and against the attempt to victimize or defame a very legitimate community mobilization. And I just want to go one step beyond that to say, we need to launch, all of us together, beyond this room, with many other participating organizations, an Yves Engler defense campaign. Now, Yves will speak to when the next court appearance will occur, but that's not the trial. That's an appearance to set a date for that. But the time will come soon, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, where we need to launch a defense campaign, not just raising money, and I invite you to put some cash into that plastic container at the door, but we need to be on the street and make it as uncomfortable as possible for the establishment media and the government and the ruling class to have their way with activists. He's one of ours, and we need to defend him and any of you who are victimized likewise, and anyone beyond this room. So keep that in mind. There will be a trial if they don't drop all the charges, and I think that's a distinct possibility because of the absurdity of the charges, but there could be a trial in late summer or early fall. So we need to be ready for that and to be on the streets to demonstrate our demand. Drop the charges now. Drop the charges now. Drop the charges. Yves.
Well, yeah, in terms of October 7th, I mean, I think that Hamas made a calculation that they tried everything's been tried by Palestinians, and the strategic perspective in the region was getting worse from the Palestinian perspective in terms of normalization with Saudi Arabia, potential normalization with Saudi Arabia, and they were clearly more successful than they expected to be. They took the 6 Israeli military outposts right away, got busted through the, knocked out the intelligence and busted through the gates quickly. And they didn't know about, I think my understanding is that with regards to the music festival, that was, it wasn't even supposed to still be going on initially. So their objective was obviously not to keep, they weren't planning on keeping territory. It was to puncture a hole in the everything is calm for the Israeli perspective when Palestinians are being terrorized, and get bargaining chips, really. And you can have your opinion on the morality of captives and stuff like that, but I mean, Israel has 10,000 Palestinian captives, right? So and they have had success in the past of exchanging. So I think that what happened from Israeli or Jewish Israeli society, they were taken. They thought they were, we were in control, and we've got them boxed in, and this not like kind of pulverize this sense of being invincible, and Biden, went full on and enabled just the level of horror that we saw. So I don't know, like Hamas, like if you look at like why Hamas, I mean, Canada plays a role in that with like they don't accept elections. And so they basically stoke a Palestinian civil war, and Canada uses its aid and uses its military training with the Operation Proteus as a way to bolster, cause Palestinian conflict and then bolster the Palestinian Authority against Hamas. And I don't know. Like I think obviously, if Israel is successful in ethnically cleansing Gaza, then history will look at October 7th as a failure from a Palestinian perspective. That would, but I don't think the jury's still out in that question, right? And like obviously anybody who's, if you look at what's happened to Palestinians, and you say like obviously anyone who's like people whose whole family wiped out, you would say like that's horrible. But if you look at, my sense is the vast majority of Palestinians in Gaza support October 7th still, right? Because they understood the situation. They tried everything, being attacked, and they want resistance. They need some resistance. So and if you look at take a historical standpoint, like what Israel's done is beyond imaginable, and the fact that it's done so open. But if in the history of colonial violence, it's not that outside of the realm of what's happened to colonial violence. I mean, Americans killed 3 or 4 million in Vietnam. French killed whatever million plus in Algeria, and you can go on, right? So in the history of colonial violence, if and I don't if 100,000 Palestinians or 200,000 Palestinians were killed in Gaza, and that got liberation, that got some sort of independence or some sort of state, even, I don't know that history would necessarily judge that as like a, so this is just the reality. I don't like it, and it's horrible, but and I don't think that Hamas is. I mean, Hamas. I'm an atheist. I don't share like the ideology of Hamas in terms of. But I think that Sinwar was pretty clear. I also say, when you look at Sinwar and like their assessment of what Zionism is, what I see, what comes to me after watching what Israel's done is that assessment is the correct one. That the Zionism is just this beyond belief horrible movement ideology, and that the only way to is through military force. I would love to believe that the international solidarity movement spurring on the more progressive elements of Israeli Jewish society, that was the way we could, that's what I would love to believe, that's what it is, or how it could change, but I don't, I think it comes down to how many Israelis can be killed, how many Israeli soldiers can be killed.
Just to interject a quick point, Israel, the Zionists, actually supported Hamas against the Palestinian left.
Yeah, for sure. And even until very recently,
convenient to have that as the official opposition coming from a socially conservative point of view. So
and even
don't forget,
even until recently, Netanyahu's been very. I mean, that's the history of undercutting social or secular kind of socialist-minded Palestinian resistance. But even more recently, that's been the assessment, because Hamas doesn't play very well in Western kind of whatever. So you want to not, if you don't want a two-state solution, you want to bolster the forces that you can get into this kind of. So that all that's there, and this is not a question. This is a question of Israel and Zionism. That's the central kind of question. And then the central question for us is how our political culture and government have enabled that. In terms of the arrest, it got lots of attention, right? Like Roger Waters did a social media share video that got hundreds of thousands of people and stuff like that. So it got a lot of social media attention. The Journal de Montréal had like just a classic little clip where it was this guy who did this thing on me, claiming that I was a Putin agent 2.5 years ago, and I don't have exact wording, but it was like well-known activist Yves Engler, well-known pro-Russian activist Yves Engler harassed 2 women. It was like, so like, this had nothing to do with Russia. it was about Israel. It's like he just chooses the Russia verse because that does, you know. And then through the harassment of two women, it's like, okay, so it was a woman police officer, that investigator. So I guess like, you know, like I've had a 5-minute conversation with this woman my whole life. I don't even know her first name. She just told me her last name. So, but
Cop.
the cop. Yeah. So, but they're claiming that whatever. Anyway, so you know, framing it as like this, you know, man attacking whatever, right? So that was pretty bad. The Gazette initial story. First, they did 2 stories. The first one was pretty bad too. Second one was a little bit better. But yeah, it got lots of social media stuff. So I think on that level, they understand that they miscalculated. Like my reading of it is that this was this kind of blew up in the face of the Montreal police and blew up in the face of Kurtz. Dahlia Kurtz probably personally doesn't have a problem with it because like she's playing to a really extreme kind of Zionist base, and so it probably serves her personal interest. But if I was in CJ Quebec's office, I'm guessing that CJ Quebec is like, Oberman made a mistake here. This wasn't really the right thing to do. That's my guess, but I don't really know that. In terms of voting, I'm a very you know, I'm in the riding with Steve Engler is the MP in my riding, and the NDP has a real shot. I don't like Nima Machouf, who I don't like. I mean, on Palestine, she's good. She tried to go on the vote Gaza, but when it comes to Iran, she's just like fully on board with the sort of Canadian government kind of line on Iran that I don't agree with at all. And she's very aggressively so, and like to the point where, you know, a few years ago after the Soleimani assassination, we organized a demo and they kind of like her partner Amir Kadir, who's well-known, you know, Quebec Solidaire person. They came and basically like sort of take over the demo and like totally reformulate what we were like no to U.S. war with Iran, you know. And anyways, so I don't, but I'm going to vote for her because I really don't like Stephen Gabal and you know, so I'm a less bad person. I've said that many times. In some situations, I'd vote for a liberal. Like if I was in a certain riding, you know, I think that there's, I think there's, you know, I agree with the macro level, like, you know, a difference between Canadian and US politics is having an NDP that, you know, changes the political terrain. So I, you know, fully agree with the notion of having a Labour Party and having that kind of pull. But when it comes down into like sort of, you know, I don't see any political party with a chance of winning that I'm going to support, like I'm going to agree with most, you know, like Nikki Ashton, okay, the best end of the NDP. Okay, I, you know, became an NDP member to vote for Nikki Ashton during the leadership race a number of years ago. I asked other people. I asked Nikki Ashton how she voted on Libya in 2011. She told me she didn't remember. She wasn't sure if she stayed outside of House or she voted in favor. And in some ways, her answer is even worse than having said I voted for it. She's like saying there was a vote that's led to the destruction of a country 14 years later, and this was in 2016, so 5 years later. And you don't know, you don't remember if you were in the House or if you abstained because you didn't want to vote for it.
Shameful.
And so, but again, that's the best end of, you know, I became a member of the party to vote for her, to ask other people to do it. So if you look at foreign policy, right, if you look at Canadian foreign policy, there's no possibility of getting in the House of Commons and having a decent foreign policy. That's just the reality of what it is. So then you're always in a matter of less bad. And then, you know, if you're less bad yeah. So, there was a final part. In terms of the trial, like, yeah, so there's a date that's just going to be, I think, a pro forma date to move. The lawyers on both sides are going to come together for a date to actually start the process on the 25th of April. Now, I kind of don't. Part of me doesn't want them to drop the charges because I want Dahlia Kurtz to testify. The idea, it was only like recent.
Decline,
Yeah, well, but then it just collapses, basically.
exactly.
It's very hard to, it's very hard. The idea of Dahlia Kurtz getting on and like being able to like question Dahlia Kurtz on different stuff, I find that quite fascinating to see that play out. I don't think that's gonna be, I don't think she's gonna wanna do that, and I don't think pro-Israel groups in general are gonna wanna do that, but who knows? Also, defeating it, right, winning has something to, so, yeah. But I think there's at least a 50% chance they'll end up just dropping off.
Thank you very much, Yves Engler. And I think his presentation tonight and his response to questions illustrates why it's important to defend the defense campaign. And I think he agrees that if there is a trial, we should have a united front defense effort across the country. Okay, so buy lots of literature. The books near the t-shirts are on consignment. He can sign them for you if you want his autograph. Buy books, buy buttons, buy all kinds of stuff here. And if you're interested in joining the socialists to make a difference in changing the world, fill out this form. Thank you very much for coming tonight.